The moving truck rumbled down the gravel driveway, sending up a cloud of dust that drifted over the sprawling yard. I sat behind the wheel of my old Ford, following close behind, my eyes fixed on the glimmer of water through the trees. The lake, my lake. It had taken me years to get here. Years of saving, years of grinding overtime shifts at the construction company, years of putting every dream on hold until I could finally buy a place where peace wasn't something I borrowed on a weekend getaway, but lived in every day. The property wasn't flashy. The house was modest, built back in the 70s with faded cedar siding and a porch that sagged just a little. But it sat on the edge of Briarwood Lake, and that made it priceless to me. The first time I walked the property with the realtor, she'd laughed at how I couldn't stop staring at the water. "You know," she'd said, flipping through her papers, "this deed actually includes the lake. Well, more than half of it. Which means I own the docks." I'd asked, unable to believe it. She nodded. "That's right. Technically, they're on your land. Homeowners around here have arrangements. But it's all tied to you." Arrangements. That word had stuck with me, but I'd brushed it off. I wasn't moving here to get tangled up in neighborhood politics. I just wanted to fish in the mornings, drink coffee on the porch, and feel the breeze off the water without hearing city traffic screaming in my ears. But I didn't even get to unload a single box before the storm rolled in. It started with a convoy of SUVs pulling into my driveway, shiny Escalades and Lexuses, all polished within an inch of their lives. The kind of cars that belonged in gated communities, not crunching over gravel in front of my fixer-upper. Doors slammed. Out came a group of men and women, dressed like they were heading to a board meeting. At the front was a woman in a stiff navy blazer, her heels sinking into the dirt with every step. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, her voice sharp, clipped. "That's me," I said, climbing out of my truck, still sweaty from the drive. She didn't bother with small talk. "We're from the Briarwood Homeowners Association. We need to discuss the lake." I frowned, wiping my hands on my jeans. "The lake?" "Yes," she said, exchanging glances with the others. "Our lake. The one you've just moved next to. The community docks, the boat slips, the access points. They're part of Briarwood." I let out a short laugh, thinking this was some kind of neighborly welcome with a misunderstanding baked in. "Ma'am, the lake is on my deed. Says so clear as day." That was when her polite mask cracked. "Listen carefully, Mr. Miller. We've maintained those docks for decades. We set the rules, we manage the lake, and frankly, we don't care what your deed says. If you think you're going to waltz in here and take control, you've got another thing coming." The group behind her nodded in unison, their faces tight with hostility. My pulse quickened. I had moved here for peace, but it was clear I had just stepped into a war. The first week should have been about unpacking boxes, setting up furniture, maybe even tossing a line in the water. Instead, it was about paperwork shoved under my door, friendly reminders that read more like threats, and HOA members showing up uninvited on my porch. They called themselves the Lake Committee, but the way they marched around, you'd think they were federal agents. Every day brought a new knock at my door. One afternoon, a man in khakis and a tucked-in polo introduced himself as Todd, the HOA treasurer. He didn't waste a second before launching in. "You can't restrict dock access," he said flatly. "We have 37 homeowners with boats that depend on those slips." I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. "I'm not restricting anything. I just moved in. But from where I stand, those docks are on my property." Todd's jaw tightened. "Property lines don't matter when there's history. We've run Briarwood Lake for 30 years. People pay dues. They expect services. If you start messing with that, you'll have the entire neighborhood against you." I didn't ask anyone to pay me a dime. I shot back. "But if those docks are on my deed, then I decide what happens on them." For a moment, Todd's polite facade faltered, and I caught the steel in his eyes. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." By the time he left, I felt the weight of it pressing down. This wasn't just about wood planks over water. It was about power, control, and I just walked into the middle of it. Word spread fast. At the grocery store in town, I overheard whispers behind me. "That's the guy, bought the lake house. He's the one trying to take the docks." Some folks looked at me like I'd stolen something. Others gave me cautious nods, like they wanted to side with me, but didn't dare speak too loud. The pressure escalated. HOA members sent letters demanding I sign an easement agreement, granting them permanent control of the docks. They claimed it was for the good of the community. I refused. A week later, I woke up to the sound of hammers on wood. Storming outside, I found a crew of men in neon vests tearing up one of the docks. When I shouted at them to stop, they barely glanced my way. HOA orders, one of them muttered. I called the sheriff. He came out in his cruiser, notebook in hand, but when I showed him the deed, he just sighed. Look, Miller, he said, lowering his voice. You're technically in the right here, but these folks? They've got deep pockets, lawyers on retainer, and half this county in their back pocket. You'd better be ready for a fight. That night, I sat on the porch, staring at the lake shimmering under the moonlight. I dreamed of peace here. Now it felt like the calm before a storm. The HOA wasn't backing down, and neither was I. It all came to a head on a hot Saturday morning. The kind of morning when the lake should have been filled with the laughter of kids jumping off docks, fishing lines tugging in the current, boats humming across the water. Instead, it was a battlefield. I woke to the sound of engines, a swarm of boats crowding into my half of the lake. Their flags and coolers made it look like a party, but it wasn't. It was a show of force. Every slip, every dock under my deed was jammed with pontoon boats and jet skis. At the center of it all stood Linda, the woman in the navy blazer, shouting orders like a general. This is our lake, she barked through a megaphone. You will not cut off our access. Neighbors cheered from the decks of their boats. Some even waved hand-painted signs. Keep the lake free. No outsiders in Briarwood. I felt my blood boil. I tried to stay calm, tried to reason, but they had pushed me too far. Grabbing my deed and a stack of documents I'd spent nights digging through at the county office, I marched down the path toward the docks. Everybody off my property, I shouted, my voice cracking through the humid air. The crowd jeered. Someone threw a beer can that landed in the grass near my feet. Linda stepped forward, her blazer gone, replaced with a sun hat and sunglasses. She smiled like a shark. Mr. Miller, you're outnumbered. You think a piece of paper gives you power here? The Briarwood community will never bow to you. I pulled out the documents and held them high. This isn't just a piece of paper. It's a recorded deed with full rights to this shoreline and every dock built on it. You've been squatting on private property for decades. And now, you're done. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few faces paled, but Linda didn't flinch. We'll bury you in lawsuits. We'll drag this out until you're broke and gone. That's when I revealed the ace I'd been holding. Already spoke to the county. Already spoke to a judge. These docks, every single one is under my control. And unless I sign an agreement, your boats are trespassing. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up behind me, dust curling around the tires. He stepped out, hat in hand, and raised his voice. He's telling the truth. As of this morning, the county confirmed it. Miller has full authority over these docks. Anyone refusing to leave is violating the law. The crowd erupted, shouting, arguing, pointing fingers at Linda. Some cut their engines and peeled away in frustration. Others cursed under their breath as they unmoored their boats. Linda's face turned crimson. You think this is over? You don't know who you're dealing with. But for the first time, I saw cracks in her armor. The mighty HOA wasn't invincible. And in that moment, with the sheriff standing at my side and the crowd dispersing, I realized I wasn't just fighting for peace. I was fighting to take back what was rightfully mine. The lake was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. The kind of still that comes after a storm, when the air smells like wet earth and tension still hums faintly under the surface. I stood on the dock, feeling the worn wood under my hands, and for the first time since moving in, it felt like my lake. The HOA didn't come back after that morning. A few mailed letters tried to challenge the deed, but the county had already confirmed everything, and most neighbors had quietly retreated, realizing I wasn't bluffing. Linda avoided me entirely, though a few weeks later I heard she resigned from the HOA. Something about too much stress and legal headaches. I didn't celebrate, I just breathed a little easier. I spent that afternoon walking along the shoreline, picking up fishing hooks and loose ropes left behind from the chaos. Each step was a reminder of what I had fought for, not just a property line, but a space where I could live my life uninterrupted. The sun dipped low, painting the water gold, and the air smelled faintly of pine and lake moss. Neighbors came by in small numbers, offering cautious apologies. Some brought baked goods, others just waved from a distance. I nodded, accepting the gestures without needing to shake hands. The confrontation had changed us all. I realized that property wasn't just land or water. It was a claim of independence, a declaration that I could stand my ground without losing my humanity. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the water lap gently against the dock. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel pride, not arrogance, but the kind that comes from knowing you stood up for what was right, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. Later, I took my small aluminum boat out into the lake. The surface reflected the fiery streaks of sunset, and the gentle rocking of the water under me felt like a reward. I cast a line, letting the lure float lazily in the ripples, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled without worry. Briarwood Lake had tested me, pushed me to my limits, and shown me the lengths people would go to protect their perceived rights. But it had also reminded me of something far more valuable, my own resolve. I didn't just inherit a lake. I inherited a responsibility to cherish it, respect it, and defend it if needed. By the time the stars emerged overhead, glittering against the dark velvet sky, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The HOA had tried to storm in, to intimidate and overwhelm, but I had endured. The docks, the shoreline, the water, they were mine. And more importantly, I had earned the peace I had dreamed of long before I ever unpacked a single box. As I drifted back to shore, the moonlight shimmering on the gentle waves, I realized that home isn't just where you live. It's where you fight for what matters, and where, in the end, you finally find calm.